Welcome to Movie Oubliette, the film review podcast for movies that most people have mercifully forgotten.
I'm Dan.
And I'm Conrad, and in each episode, we drag a forsaken film out of the oubliette.
Discuss it and judge it to decide whether it should be set free
or whether it should be thrown back and consigned to oblivion forever. We review the films others tend to forget. Come with us and open up the Movie Oubliette.
Hello listeners, welcome to Movie Oubliette episode 146, the continental traversing podcast with me, Dan, living my year of the pickle down here in Melbourne, Australia.
And me, Conrad, frantically replacing old Warner Brothers DVDs in Cambridge, UK.
Ooh. In this podcast, we discuss lesser talked about genre films, horror, sci-fi, and fantasy, because we all know the greatest evil in the world is us, Homo sapiens. Hello, Conrad.
Hello, Dan. So what is the year of the pickle?
Well, I've got really into pickling things. So I don't know what it is, but it's just like some addiction that I've somehow got into. And yeah, I just pickle everything now. I've done cucumbers, I've done carrots, I've done onions, chilies. I've done kimchi as well, so cabbage and a radish kimchi I've done. So I can't stop. I'm just constantly looking around for cheap vegetables to put in jars. So you're buying physical media.
I'm frantically replacing Warner Brothers DVDs because our good friend Michael over at Retro Blasting,
yes,
he publicized the fact that a certain batch of Warner Brothers DVDs have got disc rot.
Oh.
They were all produced in the same plant in the US, and
wow.
They are all deteriorating. And I opened up my beloved Blade Runner box set and discovered that they do not play anymore.
No.
So, yes, I hurriedly bought the Blu-ray set before it all disappears. So, yeah, scary times.
Yeah.
Wish I could pickle those.
Yeah, it is physical. And nothing does last forever.
Yeah, even if you look after it, you can get the dreaded disc rot.
Yeah.
So check your DVDs, people.
Yeah, or set up some sort of refrigeration unit. I don't know, something.
Pickling.
Yeah.
Well, somebody who doesn't need to be preserved is our special guest today. That's a weird intro. Sorry for that segue. It is, of course, writer, director, YouTube video essayist, and special friend of the pod, Serge Bodnarchuk of Cold Crush Pictures. Hello, Serge.
Hey. Hi. Thanks for having me.
Again.
Thanks for having me back.
It's great to see you. How are you doing?
Doing well. I'm at the point in my life and career where when my friends encounter cryptid media, they think of me.
Yes.
Yes.
Because I understand that this was a random drawing from a viewer's suggestion, and you messaged me and you were like, so the next movie is going to be about a cryptid. Would you like to be on? And I was like, yes.
You're our go-to guy.
Yeah, it was written, it had to be, I think, because your latest YouTube video essay is about cryptids, I believe.
Yeah, it's about dinosaur cryptid films, because I got a YouTube video series on dinosaur films. And in your message, you were like, I bet you learned a lot about the Yeti that didn't go into your video because it's not a dinosaur. And I was like, yeah, that guilty is charged.
I mean, spoilers here for what we're about to get into, but you will be our Yeti expert.
As much as, yes.
There must be a name for that. The thing I loved about your video essay was I was surprised to learn that it is much a case that art imitated life as life imitated art, which I was not expecting, that in fact sightings were based on viewings of films rather than the other way around.
Yeah, that the fact that the first detailed sighting of the Loch Ness Monster is beat for beat, shot for shot, a recreation of a scene from King Kong. I don't know why that's not more widely known. Like I didn't even know about it until I started researching the history of Nessie. You'd think it would come up anytime somebody talks about King Kong. They'd be like, oh, by the way, this is where the Loch Ness Monster comes from.
Right.
Yeah. Blew my mind, that little bit of information. I loved it. Yeah. So check that out, everyone. It's fantastic.
Yeah. So, I mean, before we get into the film that we'll do today, anything in the mailbag, Conrad?
Yes, we have been hearing a lot about Dune, you'll be surprised to hear, Dan.
Yes.
People have a lot to say about that film. Eddie Coulter got in touch to say that Via Vision, which is a label in Australia, I believe, is putting out an all-new Blu-ray of 1984's Dune with both cuts of the film, along with a bunch of extras, including his friend Daniel Griffiths' feature-length documentary on the making of Dune called The Sleeper Must Awaken.
Oh, yeah. I mean, as much as we didn't, particularly praise the film, the production design was incredible, and the sort of production history was really fascinating to research. So that I'm really interested to see what that looks like.
Yeah, I think it's an endlessly fascinating film to delve into. So I'd love to see that documentary. Somebody on Facebook called Chris said, now that you've seen the David Lynch version, please give the 2000 Sci-Fi Channel miniseries version a try. Imagine, if you will, a university drama production with a Blumhouse budget and a smattering of popular American actors to make it more accessible to the sci-fi audience. All joking aside, it and the sequel series Children of Dune are a great summer evening binge whilst barbecuing off the back deck and hosting neighbours for a friendly board game.
Okay. That sounds right up my alley, to be honest.
Yeah, I can imagine, actually. James Skirman got in touch to say, I was 9 when I went to see this at the now closed Royalty Cinema in Dartmouth, UK, during a family holiday. I remember it being very long and very weird, but also kind of cool. 40 years later, I still haven't gotten around to watching it for a second time.
Oh, wow. He's just got his 9-year-old memory of it. That's bizarre.
Yeah. And Joe Lipsett of the Horror Queers got in touch to say, okay, but Sting is hot, no?
Well, I did question that. They were going for that, weren't they?
Yeah, zero body fat and glistening. Yeah, I think he was definitely going for something. And of course, we heard from Serge of Gold Crash.
Oh, yes,
Pictures. Hello, Serge.
What did I say?
Well, you said June 1984 has a lot of interesting things in it, but given the way that it completely negates the book with its forced happy ending, its disavowal by Lynch, and the fact that you really can't sit through a screening without cliff notes, I definitely don't think it's indispensable viewing. Well, we always love hearing from you out there, so please do get in touch. So, Serge, you're one of the few guests who has the special ability to visit the oubliette and fetch a film for us. Would you like to give it a try now?
I would love to. It is an honor and a privilege. Okay. Oh, wow. Did you guys install, wind machines in here? Where's all this wind coming from? And it's so weird. Right down by my feet, there's, all this, dry white dust. But off in the distance, I can see the Alps. It's so weird. Hang on. There seems to be something buried down here. Hang on. Let me brush it aside. Okay. It's a stash of Blu-rays that somebody appears to have left from a previous expedition. Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, I'm coming out.
Oh, you're nothing but a cheap fairground trickster.
Welcome back.
Oh,
yeah.
What did you find for us?
Well, I found it is the 1957 Hammer horror forgotten classic, The Abominable Snowman, directed by Val Guest, written by Nigel Neal, and starring Peter Cushing, Forrest Tucker, Maureen Connell, Robert Brown, Wolfe Morris, Michael Brill, and Arnold Marle or Marley as the llama. And that's llama as in Dalai Lama, not the Peruvian highland creature.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. And what happens in this movie?
Well, in this film, mild-mannered British botanist John Rawlinson and his wife Helen seem content to live out the rest of their lives studying the flora of the Himalayas as guests of the local llama. That is until a team of brash American fortune hunters show up with plans to find and capture a living Yeti. Rawlinson agrees to accompany their expedition high up into the Himalayas, much to his wife Helen's dismay, and soon finds himself at cross purposes with the fame and fortune-hungry leader of the American expedition. Will they find the elusive Yeti? Will they capture the elusive Yeti? Is the elusive Yeti psychic? Find out in the 1957 Hammer horror forgotten classic, The Abominable Snowman.
Yes, yes.
Can't wait. And we're back to talk about The Abominable Snowman. I don't believe any of us had seen this before, had we?
Nope.
I had not seen it.
No, I had not.
Wow, even in your travels through cryptid world.
Yeah, Bigfoot tends to get all the movies made about it, not so much the Yeti.
Ah, right. So the difference is Bigfoot is wilderness, Yeti is snowy.
Bigfoot is specifically North America.
Right, right.
The thing about Bigfoot versus Yeti is that every single continent, practically every single country, has a myth about a 6 to 9 foot tall, hairy bipedal ape creature running around the wilderness. They just call it different things in different countries.
Right.
You've got this Bigfoot or the Sasquatch in the United States and Canada. You've got the Yeti in the Himalayas, but then you've got the Almasty in like the Caucasus region of like Georgia and Russia.
Wow.
You've got the Orang Pendek of Thailand. You have African versions. You've got Australian versions. You've got South America. Like every country's got one of these myths.
Right, yeah, yeah.
It just happens to be called the Yeti in the Himalayas.
You'll be surprised to know that in New Zealand there isn't a myth about a Yeti, but there's a myth about a moose. So apparently there's this moose that...
Oh, they're real.
This moose that keeps getting sighted in New Zealand in the wilderness. And
I've actually heard about this. I don't have any prepared notes. I just have like my impressions. But yeah, something about like an actual moose that the population was supposed to have died out a long time ago, but people keep citing it.
Yeah, it's strange.
Similar stories pop up in lots of different countries as well. Like the Tasmanian tiger of Tasmania is a very real animal that the last official specimen died in the 30s, but people keep citing it.
That's right.
Yeah. So this film, I think, was capitalizing on a very recent interest in the idea of the Abominable Snowman. It's the third adaptation of a Nigel Neal TV story, Nigel Neal being a very famous writer in the UK, screenwriter for things like The Woman in Black and The Stone Tape and an adaptation of 1984 starring Peter Cushing. He also, of course, wrote Halloween 3, Season of the Witch,
wow.
although he took his name off of that because he didn't like the way that it turned out. And he's most famous for the two films that Hammer did before this, The Quatermass Experiment and Quatermass 2, 1954 and 1956. And then they turned to this one, which was something that he'd also written for TV that Peter Cushing had appeared in before, The Creature, which is a story about the Yeti. And apparently, I read that Nigel Neal said that he was interested in it because there'd been a recent expedition and it had generated a lot of public interest in the potential existence of a Yeti. But I don't know what that expedition was. So
it was the first half of the 1950s were the most popular interest in the Yeti demonstrated by parties outside Nepal.
Right.
In 1951, there was the Shipton expedition where this guy named Shipton found footprints in the snow. And he took photographs, and they're like to this day, they're the most famous photographs of supposed Yeti footprints. Like I Googled Shipton footprint before we started recording here, and it was the second result was his famous photo. And it's a charismatic photo. It looks like the big toe looks curled in a way that doesn't look human. But it also doesn't look like a bear. It doesn't even look like a great ape. It just looks like a giant human footprint with strange toes. And it's very evocative. but there are reasons to doubt its legitimacy. But so what happened was that was incredibly popular, and then there were two more expeditions. I believe one in 1952, and then another in 1954.
Right.
Those first two expeditions that I mentioned, they weren't there to find a Yeti. They were there to chart a path to Everest. And they just like found the footprints on the way and took pictures, and that wound up being what the expedition was most famous for. And then, of course, Everest is summited in 53. Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay were asked by reporters, "Did you see the Yeti?" And they were like, "No."
Right. Yeah.
But so finally, the following year, in 1954, the Daily Mail sponsors the first big expedition whose explicit purpose was to find the Yeti. And they found nothing.
Right.
But that's when popular interest was at an all-time high.
Yeah. And then there were a whole slew of Yeti movies. And I think this is pretty much one of the last ones. And it's from very early on in Hammer's existence, pretty much before they were explicitly a horror production company. They were just sort of, I don't know, just trying to exploit trends more than anything else. They hadn't really zoned in on gothic horror particularly, but 1957 is interesting because you get The Curse of Frankenstein, which is pretty much their first gothic horror movie.
Right.
And this, which is a very different kind of movie. I think you'd be hard pushed to call it horror.
Yeah. More adventure thriller, kind of. It's not, you don't really see the creature. And even in the big reveal at the end, you still don't really see the creature.
No.
And it's definitely one of those movies where you expect it to be, oh, this monster's killing everyone. Terrible, horrifying monster. But no. Humans are the real monster, and the monster is not a monster. He's a gentle creature that just wants to be left alone. So it is kind of that trope that has become a trope more so in horror, but this movie isn't really that type of horror movie.
No.
Yeah, there are kills in it, but you don't really see them. They're not gruesome. I mean, this is the 50s. You're not going to see gruesome, bloody murder.
No. Well, I think in their previous two movies, The Quatermass Experiment and X the Unknown, the X's were in giant red lettering to try and highlight the fact that they'd got the X rating in the UK for these movies. So they were sort of like the hard R for the American audience. Whereas this one ended up getting an A because it's quite restrained. It's classy.
Yeah,
I think.
yeah, it is.
Yeah, there's very little on-screen violence. I mean, there's no gore. It's more of the conflict comes from the clash of characters than the creature.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's very on purpose. That's the point, in fact. I don't know if we want to rush straight to the end, but the characters are talking about, like Peter Cushing's character, John Rawlinson, at the end. He's like, this Yeti has not been killing off the team. It's been us.
Yeah.
Our stupid stuff that we're trying to pull, the corners we're trying to cut. And the chances that we're taking are getting us killed, and it's not the monster's fault.
Yeah, and there's this underlying theme throughout. Before they set off on their expedition, the llama is telling them, you should be careful when you go up there because they're not sort of like the last dying remnant of a previous iteration of mankind or a missing link of some kind. They're actually what's coming next. They're hiding up in the Himalayas, waiting for us to destroy ourselves through our stupidity and greed, and then they will inherit the earth. It's kind of the philosophical message you get at the beginning. And he says it in such a cryptic way that Peter Cushing's character doesn't really understand him. He listens, but he doesn't really understand. But by the end of the story, where they have, through their colossal stupidity and stupid infighting as well, they have died off, other than, I think there's like, it's just John Rawlinson that's left actually at the end of the movie, isn't it?
Yeah. I do find it kind of similar in theme to the other movie that we've discussed with you, Serge, Wolfen. So this kind of ancient creature that's just been around for millennia that just wants to be left alone, really. They just want to survive and just do their own thing while the humans just kill each other. And that is a lot of similar themes to I also found with Miyazaki movies. Like a lot of Miyazaki movies like Nausicaa, A Valley of the Wind, and Princess Mononoke, where it's about nature is mystical and mythical and ancient and just wants to be left alone. Pretty much. So just leave nature alone and you won't die.
Yeah, I was surprised how much emphasis a film in 1957 put on. They were really driving the point home where Peter Cushing is like, maybe they didn't come up to the Himalayas to die. They came up here to wait out humanity.
Yeah, I did find it surprising that this movie wasn't just what I expected it to be, a really dumb, very simple horror movie where you have a monster killing everyone off and then at the end they've somehow overpowered the monster.
Yeah.
It wasn't like that whatsoever. It was like the humans were the savages, as they put it. It wasn't about the monster. And also the Yeti seemed to have powers, like they seemed to know what they were going to do next. It was intelligent. It wasn't violent. It didn't hurt a single person in the film. That was an interesting take on it.
Yeah, there are some supernatural elements in there for sure. I think that's probably why the film, when I look at it in the various genre books that I have for reference, I don't find it in the horror encyclopedia. I find it in the science fiction encyclopedia. And I think that's where cryptids tend to be.
Yeah.
I found as well that the movie does explore sort of differences in culture as well. So yeah, of course you've got the Western versus Eastern culture with the Nepalese monks and the Lama. I noticed they spelt it Lama with an H, like exactly how the animals spelt, not how a Dalai Lama spelt.
Whoops.
Anyway, and also the difference in culture between the British and the American.
Yeah.
You've always got the foolhardy, glory-seeking Americans, charging in.
It's a tough but fair caricature.
Yeah.
He's just there to make a quick buck, isn't he? That's the interesting thing, that it's kind of the reverse shock to Aliens. In Aliens, Ripley is duped into a mission that she thinks is going to be purely focused on wiping something out and survival, and then is shocked to discover that there's a scientific effort behind it. Whereas this time it's the reverse. John Rollison finds out, what do you mean you want to kill the thing?
Yeah.
And he's quite disappointed about that. He calls Tom Friend, that's our American character, played by Forrest Tucker. He's actually replacing a character who was played by a British person in the TV version. So there wasn't that cultural split, I don't think.
Right.
I think it was just because you're trying to get an American distributor to sign on to the film, you have to have somebody American or some Americans in the cast.
Right.
So he ends up being what Peter Cushing refers to as a cheap fairground trickster at one point in the movie. But he is a pretty disgusting guy, because at one point he sets a trap for the Yeti with his friend as bait, which is not great, is it? And then gives him a gun that it later transpires has no ammo in it.
Yeah.
Just in case he shot the creature.
Yeah.
So he is a bit of a dick.
He's willing to sacrifice human lives to get his fame and glory.
Yeah, and I love the earlier point in the film where they just capture a garden monkey of some kind. And he says, well, Kusang, our guide, says this is the Yeti, and we say it's the Yeti, so that's it. It's official. That's the story now.
Yeah.
This is it. And it's this tiny
Just a monkey.
That actually reflects real-world stories.
Wow.
There are countless instances of these Westerners who are living in the Himalayas. The locals come to them and say, there's a Yeti right up there in that cave. And they're like, okay, show me. And they walk up to the cave and they look inside the cave, and it's always either like some sort of macaque or like a Himalayan brown bear. And they'd be like, that's the Yeti? And they're like, yes, that is a Yeti. That is what all the stories are about. And it's like, okay, so it's a Himalayan brown bear.
Yeah.
Or a monkey.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's generally considered the two most common explanations for what a Yeti actually is a Himalayan brown bear or some species of monkey.
Right.
So it was interesting to see it pop up in the film. And he's like, this is the story. We're going to tell him that the Yeti is this kind of monkey. And I'm like, he's not far off from the real truth there.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, right. But there have been like sort of falsified cryptids as well, like where they've just attached skeletons from other animals together
Yeah.
to try to make some mythical beast.
Yeah, there have absolutely been lots of hoaxes. In fact, there's a Yeti scalp.
Oh.
Westerners would make pilgrimages to this particular monastery in the Himalayas. It might have its own Wikipedia page. It was presented by the Buddhist monks to Western explorers and scientists as a Yeti scalp. And of course, they DNA tested in the 70s and it comes back as a Siro, which is a kind of an ungulate, like an antelope that lives in the Himalayas.
Oh, right.
Yeah, they're all hoaxes. Every single piece of this is a Yeti hand, this is a Yeti pelt, this is Yeti scat. They test it, and it's a brown bear or an antelope or human every single time.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember when they brought back a platypus to the Western world, and no one believed it was a real animal.
Yeah. I can't remember who it was who got the first platypus pelt from Australia. But yeah, they were like, man, these hoaxers just think that we'll fall for anything these days.
You got some pretty weird things down there, no doubt.
I know. I mean, yeah, it's got a duck bill. It looks like a beaver, and it lays eggs. I mean, that's pretty out there.
And it has poisonous spurs on its back feet.
Yeah, that's right.
It's got I think it's chromosomes too. It lactates, but it doesn't have nipples. It's got like humans have 2 sex chromosomes. It has a lot more than 2. Just like all sorts of, not to go too off base, you can cut this if you want, but
Wow.
platypus, pretty weird.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of Yeti hands turning up,
Yeah.
that's pretty much all you get to see in this movie is an arm that ventures into a tent. It is every NRA member's nightmare. It goes straight for the guns. And that is all you get to see, even though director Val Guest mentions in the commentary track that they were building him a full-sized Yeti prop and makeup, and they had a guy for the suit and so on and so forth. He was saying to them, you can build whatever you like, I'm not going to show it.
Really?
He was determined, and yet Nigel Neal thinks that was a mistake and he should have done, even though he recognises that the technology they had available at the time would not have done it justice. He thinks that he was cheating the audience. And I do feel it specifically at the moment when they have shot one and the camera just will not tilt down to show you what they've shot.
Yeah, and towards the end as well, when Peter Cushing's character faces off with one or two actually, and it walks towards the camera, and it's just the face, but it's all mostly in shadow. Like you don't really get a good glimpse of what it actually looks like.
Yeah, they give it the Morticia Addams treatment, where there's this shaft of light that's shooting across its eyes, and that's it. Everything else is in shadow.
Yeah.
So that you can see the, quote, sadness and wisdom
Yes.
in the Yeti's face, as Rollison describes
Yeah.
it. That's all you're supposed to get. And sort of a Star Trek The Next Generation approach to aliens, which is slightly weird nose. That's it.
Yeah. So if you are going into this movie expecting a lot of Yeti, you're not going to get a lot of Yeti.
No. You are going to get a lot of suspense, though.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing. Although this is a 1950s movie, the way that it operates is obviously different to the way that we would expect now in terms of generating suspense and tension. But this was billed at the time as a nerve-jangling, grueling tale of suspense. And I can see why. I can see what they're doing and how effective it probably was for audiences then.
Yeah, I think they do that with the characters and the dialogue, but I do find the setting adds a lot to it, like the whole mountainside and the close quarters with the tent and the huts that they stay in. It did remind me of The Thing, actually. It has that sort of very claustrophobic, like isolated feel to it.
Yeah, and the location shooting helps.
I was surprised by that. Like I didn't expect like actual mountainside. I mean, it's not always actual mountainside, but a good chunk of it is.
Yeah. So the film combines two techniques. It's when it's the headlining actors, it's on a set. Pinewood Studios, but they also have extensive wide shots that were done on location with stand-ins.
Yeah.
And I thought that they were working really well. It's not just like one establishing shot of the mountain. They're constantly cutting to these wide shots, which I was surprised to find from the commentary track were not the actors, that they were just stand-in. I thought that stand-ins or stands-in. Anyway, I thought they did a really good job of matching them. And then Val Guest says on the commentary track that they worked very hard to make sure that they were matched well. That like what an actor's arm was doing when it came time to shoot outdoors, they would relay that to the stand-in to make sure that it all matched continuity. So you can tell that they're on sets in some of the shots, but there are enough of these on location shots done that it doesn't feel like, as you said earlier, it doesn't feel like an episode of Star Trek, because like the cameras wouldn't operate at those altitudes and those temperatures, so you know they're not actually filming there. But I think they did a good job of blending the two.
Yeah, I think it blends really well because it is a black and white film.
Yeah.
So, you know, white is kind of easy to match. Like,
Yes, very true.
with black and white, you know. So there's that. But I was impressed. I was really impressed. I mean, the main sort of tell that it was on set was because of the sound, because it sounded indoors. That was the main, But I mean, it didn't look cheap, like even though you could tell it was a set. And what was the snow made out of? Does anyone
I think
know?
it's salt.
Yeah, I read salt.
It is salt.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it had a nice powdery look to it, but I could tell it wasn't wet.
Right.
That was my only, this isn't real.
Yeah. Then the actors don't look terribly cold either, which is always the problem. I don't think you can see their breath indoors. Yeah, the 2 weeks they did, I think they shot on the Pyrenees, so not the Himalayas, but it didn't pull me out of the movie because I was just so impressed at the scope of it otherwise. And the scope, of course, it adds to the fact that it is CinemaScope. It's full 235 or hammer scope, as they called it. So it is a very handsome film with a very impressive sense of scale and remoteness in terms of the location. It must have been quite exciting as a kid of the 50s to go and see this expedition into the Himalayas.
Yeah, and even the sets, the rocky mountainsides indoor sets, looked really, really good. Some of the shots being very ambitious with the avalanche scene and the blizzard scene.
Yeah.
Like, it's convincing.
Yeah, I was impressed with the production overall.
Yeah.
This is the first time, I have to admit, that I have seen Peter Cushing not as Moff Tarkin.
Right.
We've seen him as Sherlock Holmes, actually, in Hound of the Baskervilles.
Yes.
But other than that, I'm ashamed to say I've never seen him play anything else. He's a very good actor.
Yeah, he is. He is. And he's playing a different character than what I'm used to anyway. He's not a commanding, you know.
Space Nazi.
Yeah. Yeah. He's quite a warm, generous, like considerate person, and trying to preserve a ancient creature as well, and very logical and practical about things. Like he's not always resorting to this is the worst thing that can happen. Like when Ed dies, he checks him and he's like, oh, there's not a scratch on him. He died of a heart attack. So he's very pragmatic.
Yeah, but also kind. I'm remembering a moment where the first victim is McNee.
Yes, that's
who hears the calling of the Yeti coming over the mountain, and he either just starts scaling a cliff without any gear or safety equipment, and he loses his footing and he falls and he dies. And then I can't remember what pulls them away from McNee's poor broken body, but Ed starts screaming back at base camp, and they run back, and Ed announces that he just was attacked by 2 Yetis. And so like, okay, let's set up a trap for when they come back. And they're talking about how they're going to trap the Yetis, and all of a sudden, Peter Cushing goes, I need a spade. And they're like, what for? Oh, right, McNee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I thought was great. I thought they did a really good job of making Peter Cushing, he's just like such a sweetheart.
Yes.
Who just like doesn't want anybody to get hurt.
Yeah.
But he's at constant odds with the character. His last name is Friend, which I found ironic. Because I kept forgetting that his name was Friend, and so Cushing would look at him and be like, "Friend, what are you doing?" And I thought he was calling him Friend sarcastically.
Friend. Yeah.
But no, yeah.
Because everyone was referring to everyone as different names. So it was John to Helen, but he was Rolleston to everyone else, or Doc to Tom, and then there was like it's a Peter Fox, but everyone called him Foxy. It was a bit confusing. But going back to Peter Cushing's character being very sort of sympathetic. Also, he was very respectful to the Nepalese culture as well. He embraced tea drinking while everyone else was complaining about it, and also the Americans just being very racist to any of the sort of local people. So
the Americans are, anytime the Nepalese come up, they insult them.
Yeah,
to the point where like the monks at the monastery start singing and dancing. And the American friend looks out the window and he's like, what is a war dance? And Peter Cushing goes, no, they're Buddhists. They don't believe in war.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think the Americans refer to them as ignorant natives. And at one point when they're coming into camp, I think it's Ed says to another one, stick close, these guys will eat you.
Yeah, awful.
And that isn't just limited to the Americans, though, because, of course, Peter Cushing's character is contrasted heavily with Foxy, who is very much the British Empire stereotype, who's also staring down his nose at these people and calls them ghastly and can't wait to get home to civilization. And yet, oddly enough, when the Americans show up and start being rude to them, he defends them and says that he finds them quite lovely. So I don't know what's going on there.
It's confusing. Yeah, it's mixed messaging.
I don't think it's supposed to be good on his part. I think it's just hypocrisy. So it's even worse. I don't think it's supposed to reflect well on Foxy that he flip-flops in that moment. I think it's just hypocrisy on his part. But it all goes to reinforce Rollason as this gentleman scholar, the sort of ideal of the scientist who's just interested in knowledge and discovery and embracing different cultures as he finds them because he wants to understand and respect them, which is quite a wonderful central character to have. And you also have the fact that he has brought his wife with him, or I should say his wife has accompanied him because he describes her as his colleague, as his partner, as every bit his equal in this exercise.
Yeah. Also, the fact that one might assume that she isn't going to follow them up the mountain because she's like not qualified or she's just a woman who can't handle it. No, it's not that. She knows it's stupid.
Yeah.
She's like, please don't tell me you're going up into uncharted Himalayan territory in the wrong season to go find a Yeti. And he's like, no, I really want to. And she's like, all right, well, I'm going to be back at base camp.
Yeah. And then she has the agency to create her own rescue party and leads it, in fact, to go and rescue her husband. 1957.
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it is. It is.
I've watched a couple of 1950s giant monster movies in the last couple of months, and they all have like one stock female character, and they're always either the daughter or the assistant of a scientist who's of like an ancient 85-year-old scientist who's there to like pontificate about the hubris of man. And then they have like sometimes literally a Playboy centerfold model as like his daughter who's there for the mission. And but so, and you've already made this point, I'm just repeating it with more detail, but yeah, it was very refreshing to see Helen, even though she's not a main character so much, but even her staying behind is proving a point beyond just she's not going with them. And then of course, she mounts the expedition to go and rescue him because he does not get off the mountain by himself.
I mean, she's the one that discovers him as well at the end.
Yeah, she does. Did I read it right that there are footprints in the snow? Is the suggestion that Rollason was either accompanied back or carried back?
By a Yeti,
Yeah. So he was rescued.
Yeah, the Yetis brought him back to his wife. That's how he got off the mountain.
Wow. That's a very different ending from what I was expecting.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not to say that it doesn't sort of dip into some obvious tropes sometimes. We do get the white lady in danger trope at one point with Helen where she's surrounded by Nepalese people and has to be rescued, quote unquote, by Foxy, who rushes in and disperses them.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't think there's any sense that they want anything other than just to get paid, actually.
Well, yeah. They've been left high and dry by the Americans and not being paid. Yeah, I mean, there's a scene as well where she is quite distressed, and it does feel like this is a sort of old Hollywood portrayal of woman being distressed and hysterical, and she, barges in on the llama. And
Yeah, that was a weird scene that I forgot about.
Yeah, that was the one where I noticed she's woken up, I don't know, smelling salts or something, or given a stiff drink, and the llama says to her, "The servants found you in the secret part of the building." And I thought, why does this temple have a secret part?
yeah.
No. So it does sort of tread into some of those nativist tropes every now and again. There's a scene I was a little bit disappointed by as well, where Helen spots a couple of porters talking to each other, including Kusang, who's going to lead Rollison's expedition up into the Himalayas. And there's a music sting, and she immediately flies off in a panic, obviously just assuming the natives are conspiring to kill her husband or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
I was a bit confused by the depiction of the llama. It kind of looked like they were trying to make him out to be evil, like having some sort of a hidden agenda, but then he didn't. I don't know what the approach was.
Yeah. Well, the first thing they did was they hired a German to play him.
Yeah, I was going to get into that in the movie awards, but it reminded me of the scene with Breakfast at Tiffany's where it's,
Oh, Mickey Rooney.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's a product of the time,
Yeah, it's a very white guy playing a Tibetan and trying to be as mysterious as possible in all of his line readings.
Yeah, I mean the accent is completely wrong as well.
Yeah.
He sounds like Eastern European.
Yeah.
But I kind of wouldn't have liked him doing a sort of an Asian Nepalese accent either. So maybe it was better this way.
And to be fair, the accents generally were a little bit all over the place. I mean, Cushing's pretty much got British gentleman down. But as for the guy that's playing McNee, the Scottish person, I don't know what the hell that was.
Was he supposed to be Scottish?
Yeah.
Oh.
What the hell was that?
I thought he was French.
Yeah. Michael Brill, who's from Croydon.
Wow.
He is not Scottish. I don't know what the hell that was. It's very strange.
Yeah, I did not get Scottish from that.
I didn't either. It's about as Scottish as Highlander. Christophe Lambert.
Yes. Now it's time for random trivia. Okay, it's trivia time. Conrad, what piece of trivia have you uncovered from a snowy peak today?
Well, when this film was being developed, they initially went with a slight modification of the TV version's title, The Creature. They called it The Snow Creature, just to
of course.
not leave anybody in any doubt. Slight problem, they discovered that there'd already been a film about a Yeti in 1954 called The Snow Creature, directed by W. Lee Wilder, who is the brother of Billy Wilder, director of Some Like It Hot and Sunset Boulevard.
Right.
But it's complete exploitative trash,
Okay.
by all accounts. Haven't seen it, so shouldn't judge, but yeah. So, yeah, they suddenly switched to The Abominable Snowman, which in the US print, for some reason, was appended with Of the Himalayas, in case they thought it was, the Brooklyn one or something.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Yeah, there you go. And that's our trivia.
Shall we talk about the score?
So the score is by Humphrey Searle, the composer behind a film that we've covered already, The Haunting, 1963. But whereas The Haunting demonstrates his interest in modernist approaches like serialism, this one is very romantic, I thought.
It is.
Yeah, which was, again, not what I was expecting. Quite fulsome, quite present, quite active, very much of its time. Very beautiful, very effective, I thought. He never did another Hammer movie. And people have noted that his score for this is very similar to Ralph Vaughan Williams' work for Scott of the Antarctic, which was released in 1948. So I don't know if he was sort of going for the romance and the excitement of the adventure more than the terror and suspense of being in an isolated location with an unknown mystical creature.
Yeah, I found it quite a grand score. Like, it was a very full orchestra, lots of strings. Yeah, like you said, very romantic, quite sort of melodramatic almost. Like, the scenes were like much more theatrical sounding with the score in them. Also, quite well cued. Like, there were lots of scenes with no score at all. Like, it's just dialogue. And so it wasn't that never-ending music that a lot of sort of old Hollywood tended to do. Interesting ideas as well. You've got throat singing. I guess that was more diegetic music with the monks. You've also got some harp in there, kind of interesting texture, and also using... I don't think it's like Asian modes or scales, but more, it almost sounded like more Arabian, like Middle Eastern sounding scales.
Yeah.
But you know, it's ethnic, right? It's not normal major minor scales.
Yeah.
So there was a different take on it as well. I mean, I guess expected because you know you're in the Himalayas. Of course, it's going to sound exotic.
Yeah, I did notice that there are, you know, quote unquote Orientalisms, which is not a nice word, but for that stinger, for example, where Helen sees the two porters talking and just instantly assumes the worst, the stinger for that is pentatonic, I think.
Is it? Right, because I hear a lot of non-pentatonic scales. Like there's a lot of chromatic or like some chromatic movement, which is I would normally associate with like sort of Middle Eastern type sort
maybe
of
it was
music.
For any listeners that aren't musically inclined, what does pentatonic mean?
No, pentatonic is a normal scale is made out of 8 notes. Well, technically 7 notes. A pentatonic scale is only made out of 5 notes. So, and it always goes up in the same way. So it's like, this is going to sound very musical, but it's gonna like, it'll be like the root note and then a tone, and then it'll skip to a tone, and then it'll go to a third above and then another tone. So it's only 5 notes to a scale as opposed to 7, 8 notes. It does have a very cultural sound to it, although it is used a lot in blues music as well. So you've got that. So it's adopted into a lot of guitar-driven music as well.
right.
So traditionally Asian sounding the pentatonic scale.
Yeah, to Western ears, and so it ended up, you know, whenever a supposedly Asian character would turn up in a cartoon, they'd all of a sudden start playing sort of chopsticky type of intervals.
Yeah. It just seems very racist these days.
It does.
But I mean, it was a way of sonically saying, "Hey, we're not in America right now. We're in the Himalayas." It's the same way where every time you see an army or the military on screen, you've got to have like snare drum rolls and like, you know, a brass band.
This is neither here nor there. Feel free to cut this, but I watched the Flintstones, the live action one from '94 a couple of weeks ago.
Oh.
And Halle Berry has a bit part in it.
Yeah.
And every single time she walks on camera, it's saxophone plays every single time.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen that movie kind of as an adult, and it really doesn't age that well.
No.
It's it's an uncomfortable watch.
Oh, yeah. You can skip it.
Coming to you live from the Movie Oubliette Theatre, it's the prestigious Mobley Awards.
Hello, it's the Mobley Awards, where we nominate our favourite 10-foot tall furry parts of the film in a number of glacial, blizzard-swept categories.
Best quote.
It's kind of a little speech that Cushing gives when they're speculating on the true nature of the Yeti. And he says, "Suppose they're not just a pitiable remnant waiting to die out. They're waiting, yes, but waiting for us to go. Suppose we are the savages. Perhaps to them we are the Dark Ages. Not Homo sapien, the thinking man, but Homo vastes, man the destroyer."
Yeah. Oh, I love that one.
That was my favorite.
It's great, yeah. It's the whole premise of the movie just summed up in one amazing speech. It's great. I went for something really, really prurient and childish. I thought that nothing could really beat Peter Cushing's deathless opening line to the movie, which was, "Have you seen this veining, Foxy?"
Oh.
With them both bent over something. You don't know what it is. It's like, what the hell is happening here?
Yeah.
I think they're looking at a plant.
Sounds questionable out of context.
It is. The nickname Foxy does not help. So.
Best hair or costume?
This is the no-brainer. It's got to be the Yeti's face,
Oh, right. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
which like
Very subtly done.
critically, they do nothing to the eyes. Which, like, how do you convey otherness when the point is to not change the eyes? Conrad, you said it earlier. You give them a weird nose.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is. It's the Star Trek approach. Leave the actor their eyes so that they can still convey things.
Yeah.
But yeah, just give them a weird nose or weird brow or something.
Yeah.
I went for something that I was very impressed with, which was Helen's sensible and stylish white knitted rescue snood, which she wears when she sets off to rescue her husband off the Himalayas. Liked it very much. Looked really comfortable and warm.
Most 50s moment.
That would have to be the theme of scientists are delving into secrets they aren't meant to know,
Oh.
which was much more explicitly stated in things like The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. Like, it had a whole ad campaign, which was like, it was usually atomic films.
Oh yeah, of course.
It was like, man's hubris will get itself killed, which is interesting that they had such a strong presence of that theme in this film, even though no discussion of nukes, obviously. But yeah, this whole idea that there are pieces of nature that we shouldn't interfere with. But at the same time, it's less science interfering with nature than showmanship and the monetization of discovery that is being... I'm undermining my own selection here by saying, oh, this was such a cliche, except that it wasn't a cliche, but yeah, that reminded me of the 50s the most.
Yeah. My suggestion would be Helen might be able to mount and lead an expedition into the Himalayas to rescue her husband, but she can't put on a coat unless a man holds it up for her.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
That's right.
Put on your own damn coat, Helen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Favorite scene?
So my favorite scene is when McNee and Rollison are in the tent. McNee has accidentally stepped in a Yeti trap and his ankle's been injured. And Cushing has spotted a Yeti at this point. They both have. And McNee asks Cushing, what did it look like? And Cushing starts rattling off all these, its height, its weight, and how its age is probably difficult to assess. And then McNee stops him. And he goes, no. Did you see what it looked like? And that's when Cushing says, yeah, there was a sadness and a wisdom to it. And I really like that.
Yeah.
My favorite scene, which is when we get to the point when Friend and Rollison are the last remaining expedition members, and they hear Ed calling for help on the wind when Ed's dead and wrapped up outside their tent. And that's the one piece of sort of uncanny, eerie horror, I think real existential horror that you get. And maybe that is because of this psychic or extrasensory aspect that isn't developed. But it reminded me so much of Josh's fate in the Blair Witch Project from 1999. Where again, group of people looking for a mythical thing that lives out in the wilderness somewhere, and one of them goes missing, and then the others can hear them calling for help in the middle of the night. But I think this is better because his dead body is outside, so it's clearly irrational.
Yeah.
And all the more disturbing for it because then you definitely know that what you're hearing is coming from something else.
Yeah.
Most cliche moment.
It wasn't a cliche at the time, I don't think. But hiding the monster for as long as possible sort of became a cliche. I think it's a great example of a cliche done really, really well because you don't really miss the fact that you haven't seen a Yeti yet. Like 2/3 of the way through the film, like there's still enough conflict between the characters that you're still engaged and you're not checking your watch waiting for the Yeti to show up. And then when it does show up, but they pointedly don't show you the Yeti. There are several Yeti attacks that take place completely off camera. But there's a thematic reason, I guess, that they sort of put in there for not showing the audience the Yeti until literally the last possible chance. So it's a cliche that I really, really liked.
Mine is the locals are afraid of the beast. The mere mention of the word Yeti startles Kusang.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it happens in every culture, so it's not just sort of in the Empire versus the indigenous cultures. It also happens in American Werewolf in London, which I mentioned in the last episode too, with the locals in the pub terrified of the werewolf. So, yeah. It's a cliche.
Yeah.
Best special effect.
I thought it was a special effect until I listened to the commentary and found out it wasn't. It's when the Americans first show up at the monastery, you can see their breath.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's so cool. Did they refrigerate the set? Did they make them like suck on ice between takes or something? How did they get their breath cold? And then on the commentary, Val Guest is like, yeah, we filmed this outside in February. And I was like, oh, okay.
It was cold.
Yeah.
That worked out well.
Yeah.
Yeah. My favorite was the opening matte painting of the Tibetan monastery on the mountainside with the live element of like a post with some fabric attached to it flapping in the breeze in the foreground that brought it to life. I thought, wow, this is good work. It's nice.
Yeah.
Favorite sound effect.
My favorite sound effect is the keening of the Yetis. That cry that drifts and echoes across the mountaintops after they've killed the first one.
Yeah. It's mournful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. It's not what you're expecting at all.
Yeah, no, not at all.
It's scary, but not because it's menacing, but because it's so sentient and sad.
Yeah, it is.
What about you, Dan?
So one sound I would like to pick out is the cowboy western bullet ricochet sounds when they it's just like I just think of cowboy westerns when I hear it. It's such a iconic sound.
Most funniest moment.
So my funniest moment is definitely unintentional. It's when it's the first death when McNee falls off the mountain.
Yeah, that's mine too.
And there is a very brief shot. It's like less than a second. It's less than 24 frames of McNee's body falling and striking a rock. And the thing is, it's like you expect in a cheap production they drop like a mannequin.
Yeah.
I don't even think it was a mannequin.
Yeah.
I think they literally dropped like a pair of pants and a jacket off of a styrofoam cliff.
It doesn't look solid at all. It just looks like he just suddenly disappeared and only his clothes remained.
Like he got raptured in mid-fall.
Yeah. Funniest for you?
The thing I laughed at the most was Tom Friend. Okay, he's delusional. But yeah, he's firing his gun everywhere whilst searching for Ed in a snowstorm. I don't know how firing the gun is helping.
Yeah.
Is it a source of light? What is he doing other than bringing an avalanche down on himself and possibly shooting Ed if he is out there? I've no idea.
And that's our movie?
That's our movie.
I'm Mary Jo Peel, and you are listening to Movie Oubliette.
That's right, it's final verdict time. Should the abominable snowman from 1957 be set free to wander the snowy peaks and be admired for its hairy greatness? Or should it be hit with a mighty avalanche and plummet back into oubliette and be a forgotten myth never seen again? Serge, you're our guest. Should this movie be seen by people?
I say set it free. Absolutely.
Yes.
It was quite a pleasant surprise. I haven't seen a lot of Hammer horror, but the ones that I've seen, including ones that you guys have reviewed on this podcast, I was not impressed. So I was like, okay. So I don't know, when I was doing research, I was like, okay, early era Hammer horror about a cryptid film that I had never heard of. I was like, how good could it be? But I was really surprised. It's like if this were an episode of Twilight Zone, it would be a classic. Everybody would still be talking about it, I think.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this should be more widely known and widely seen.
I kind of agree. I think it subverts a lot of expectations. It was nothing of what I expected. I thought it was just going to be a dumb B-grade horror movie with a guy in a rubber suit, but it was it was none of that. And it was very, very ahead of its time for the 50s, like theme-wise, like character-wise, dialogue-wise. It was really impressive. And, you know, whitewashing aside, you know, that's the time that it was. It's a pretty solid film. I would set it free.
Yeah, I agree. I was really surprised as well, because I tend to think of Hammer as being the place where Britain did its creaky Gothic castles with Dracula and blood. This is a really classy picture. I mean, it's a handsome production. It's got fantastic dialogue. Cushing's amazing in it. And it's got a really lofty philosophical theme to it that I was not expecting at all. It's not a monster on the run movie. It's man coming a cropper on the mountain and proving the llama's prophecy correct. It's, yeah, really quite thought-provoking, atmospheric, and it even has a little bit of existential horror in the middle of it, with people getting delusional and hearing things on the wind. That genuinely creeped me out from a film in 1957.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I was very pleasantly surprised. So I would set it free as well.
Yes, yeah. We have to mention as well, this is a patron's choice. So Eddie Coulter that chose it. Thank you very much for letting us witness this film that no one has probably ever seen.
Well, we ought to check in with our patrons and find out what their final verdict was. Hello, Hal.
Yes, Conrad.
Final verdict, please.
It's unanimous. They want to set it free.
Oh,
Yeah.
everyone agrees.
Everyone agrees. Eddie Coulter himself came back to say, set it free. The Abominable Snowman of the Himalayas is one of my favourite Hammer films that unfortunately gets overlooked because it had the misfortune of being released between the Hammer juggernauts of The Curse of Frankenstein and Dracula. If you're a fan of Nigel Neal's Quatermass movies, then I highly recommend you give this one a chance. Jasmine said, I've been wanting to see this since Dark Corner Reviews, my other favourite internet movie commentators, reviewed it a couple of years ago. This patron's choice was the kick in the pants I needed to watch it. I thought it was excellent. The scenery was visually mesmerizing. After seeing so many Bigfoot and Yeti movies where the creatures spend their screen time ripping people to shreds, it was very refreshing to have a take where they don't do that and yet it still manages to be intense and utterly terrifying. Great pick, Eddie Coulter. Chazilla says, I've always liked The Abominable Snowman. Reminds me of classic Twilight Zone. Just what you said, Serge.
Yeah.
Just longer. Love the black and white photography, the practical effects, and real sets. Anyone else miss matte shots as much as I do? Try as they might, not even Peter Cushing could get anything past the High Llama. The choice not to reveal the full creature until the very end and then just in silhouette with a close-up of its eyes really builds the anticipation and terror. Still scares me. By the way, I propose a drinking game. Take a shot every time that prick Tom Friend hollers Kusang. And maybe, just maybe, it won't haunt your dreams. And finally, Iconographer said, I'd never heard of this movie. What a pleasant surprise. I do love creature features from the 50s, so this was a lot of fun. Great storytelling and suspense. Let those abominable snowmen free to wander the Himalayas.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right. It's official.
It is.
Set it free.
Off you go. Let's just open that cage. Bye, Yeti. Well, Serge, it's been fabulous having you here, especially to lend your expertise from your recent video, or at least unused material from your recent video here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, where can people follow you and hear more of your views and your cryptid knowledge?
Across all social media, I'm either Cold Crash Pictures or Cold Crash Pics, if the URL could not be that long. But primarily it's YouTube. YouTube is the thing, the real thing that I put most of my time and effort into. I just recently released a video about dinosaur cryptid films, which you can see. And I've started researching my next scripted video is going to be the next episode of Sorry in Cinema.
Ooh.
Great.
Any hints as to what that's going to be about yet?
I can tell you that it'll be about all 6 Jurassic Park films, but through one particular critical lens, one particular like scholarly angle.
That'll be interesting. I haven't seen many overviews of all of them yet, so that should be interesting.
Yeah. And yes, listeners, if you want to follow Movie Oubliette, we are everywhere as Movie Oubliette. And you can email us as well as at movie.oubliette@gmail.com.
Yes, and if you want to support the show, then head on over to Patreon, where for as little as $1, you get access to extended portions of the show and can nominate films for future episodes, as Eddie Coulter did for today.
Yes.
For $5, you get to vote on the final verdict and get access to our monthly minisodes. And for $10, you can be an executive producer like Serge.
Yeah.
And Chazilla, Eddie Coulter, Isaac Sutton, Dr. Doggy, and Iconographer.
Yeah. We really enjoyed the Patron's Choice today. We have also got merchandise at Redbubble and a YouTube channel as well. And if you haven't already, give us a rating and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever you're listening to us on. It does help us out a lot.
It does.
So, Conrad, next film. What is up for the next episode?
Well, we will be remaining with a British-American crossover production, but this time in my favorite decade, the 80s.
Ooh.
It's the 1980 American supernatural horror film, The Watcher in the Woods.
Oh, yes. I haven't seen this one. It's been on my watch list for years. People keep mentioning it. I don't know anything about it. Very keen to check it out.
I've never heard of it.
It's a childhood favorite of mine. It's from Disney's dark period when they were experimenting with darker material and it all went horribly wrong for them. So I shall enjoy seeing your reaction to that one, Dan.
Yes. Okay. All right. Looking forward to it. Thanks, Serge, for joining us again on another episode. And listeners, until next time, goodbye.
Bye for now.
Bye.
We review the films others tend to forget. Come with us and open up the movie Oubliette.
If you should feel like another nip of that, nobody's gonna call you a tippler.